Hey, gang, this week's episode is brought to you by oldschoolshirts.com. Hey, check them out. You like defunct teams and leagues and t-shirt form? Well, you'll find them there, but a whole bunch of other stuff, too. Do you remember a radio station of the past or perhaps a mall that you used to go to? All kinds of great cultural and sports memories can be found at the great folks at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. And now, here's our show.
The fans, not so Maxwell. 15 from 16, and the Freedom are suddenly 171 for 5 here.
Start it is! Already, there are some celebrations on the field. It may go for runs, but the men in blue have done what at the time seemed improbable. Emma New York have taken the road less desired, but they have proven it's not how you start, it is how you finish.
Lovely pictures here with Coach Ricky Ponting, and then he lost the strike there in that last over and he couldn't get it back because Maxwell got out. So what a script.
Mr. Prasad Sankaran to present the Cognizant Major League Cricket Trophy for 2025 to the championship captain, Nicholas Moran and MI New York.
Give it to us. It's so embarrassing.
They did it the hard way. So poor, actually, by their standards at the beginning of the tournament, but
yeah, learning is all part of it. You mentioned Natalie. This tournament will grow and grow with 2 new venues and a couple of old heads as well. Having a ball and celebrating and long into the night. Don't know if they'll be filling that trophy with any liquid anytime soon though.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right. Settle down, everybody. My name is Tim Hanlon, and it's Good Seats Still Available. It's the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. Thank you for finding us and for joining us this week. Happy to have you along. You know that we there's no stone left unturned in our journeys over the last number of years, looking for teams and leagues and sports and events and situations and various related ephemera around what used to be in pro sports, the forgotten leagues and defunctness of it all. And there is a sport that we've only nibbled around the edges of that we continues to fascinate. And we finally have found an excuse this week to go back to it. And that is, as you heard in that little clip there to set us up, the sport of cricket, which surprisingly has a very long and deep history in the United States, to the shock and dismay and amusement of many. That is not only a journey worth exploring, but also lives on in this thing called Major League Cricket here in the United States. And as you heard that little clip there, that was from Major League Cricket's final about 3 months back in Grand Prairie, Texas, of all places. And if you haven't been following the evolution of the sport and this league over the last couple of years, you may know or may not know that in Grand Prairie, there is the really the only sort of professional cricket stadium in the United States. And it's built, actually, it was reconfigured from a minor league baseball stadium into a dedicated, purpose-built or purpose existing structure for cricket. And it's where for now 3 seasons now, Major League Cricket, quote unquote, has applied its wares, as well as other places. This summer also included a couple of matches in the old Oakland Coliseum and a number of other places around the country, both artificially created as well as potential conversions, if you will, to maybe full-time cricket stadia. But it's an interesting existence, this Major League Cricket. It's officially known as Cognizant. That's the consulting firm known in professional hallways. Cognizant Major League Cricket. And that was the some clips there from the final between the now two-time champion MI New York and the Washington Freedom. And as you can tell by the intonations there of the coverage, and we'll talk about this in our conversation coming up with our guests this week, Beth Simpson and Mark Greenslade. They have a brand new book out that is devoted to this entire history, both past and interestingly present and potentially future, called An American Cricket Odyssey, A Journey into the Soul of Cricket in the United States. It is a fascinating tale, and one that truly is amazing as to just how far back the history of the sport goes. But frankly, also, mostly unbeknownst to me, just the crazy current status of the sport in this country. And as our old friend and our dearly departed friend, Steve Holroyd, who untimely passed away this summer, and as you may remember, longtime listeners of this show may remember Steve as being one of our biggest champions and common guests. And it was last year in 2022 talking about pro cricket, this thing called pro cricket. It was a league that was around for literally one season back in 2004, and was one of a number of different attempts, Major League Cricket being the latest version of such, to get a pro league going in this country. We talk about that in that episode at length with Steve. It's worth a listen. And we'll talk about it with Beth and Mark in this episode as well. But it's an interesting blip in this professional journey that is timely as today's headlines. Now, I need to set this up. Besides that clip that you heard there, and the intimation that there will be two more teams to the 6-team circuit that is known as Major League Cricket. An update is in order, because that clip came from about 3 months ago. And this episode that we recorded with Beth and Mark was done back in early September. And literally a week after this, and I'm sorry we were only getting to it now, but literally a week after we recorded this, all kinds of legal shenanigans have since occurred. And you could hear in our conversation that the relationship between Major League Cricket and the various attempts at organizing the professional and the amateur game in the United States and the organizations devoted to such, to say there's contention, and the international cricket overseers, the FIFA, if you will, of cricket, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess between the international oversight of the sport and the various attempts for various organizations in the United States to organize the U.S. components of that. Well, it turns out that now, as we drop this episode, the first week or so of November, despite the Major League Cricket saying they're going to be back for a fourth season, the ownership of Major League Cricket is now instigating legal proceedings against USA Cricket, the supposed overseer of the sport here in the United States, and that's a response apparently to USA Cricket essentially delegitimizing or not granting its continued blessing for Major League Cricket and what it's done over the last number of years. And it gets really complicated because there are national teams involved. The Olympics are coming up in 2028. Cricket's going to be part of that in 2028 after a long absence. The opportunity for the United States to coalesce around the sport coming out of those games, all that kind of stuff. The drama never seems to end with this sport, and you could be forgiven for not knowing any of this because it's a relatively still, quote unquote, wait for it, foreign sport in the United States, even though it has a very deep and rich history. Sounds a lot like soccer's history in this country. as our friend Steve would certainly chuckle over, because that's certainly what we came to the conclusion in our conversation back in 2022 about this. But I think you will find this fascinating, whether you're an adherent and a fan of cricket or not. If you're mystified or curious about it, if you have any appreciation to the long arc of history for not only the major sports in the United States, but that of, say, soccer and certainly this cricket thing, I think you're going to find all of this hauntingly familiar and endlessly fascinating, as I have and do. And this book is just it's really an interesting entree into all of it, and it's not boring by any means, especially when you understand how in various pockets around the country this sport is very much alive and thriving in unlikely places like Philadelphia and South Central LA, if you can believe that. It's really a fascinating tale of a sport that is still looking for its, shall we say, professional roots to solidify in the United States. The book, again, it's called An American Cricket Odyssey, A Journey into the Soul of Cricket in the United States. It is published by our friends at Pitch Publishing, and it is available now wherever good books are found. Of course, if you'd like to give us a couple of shekels of referral love from our friends at Amazon and buy it that way, by all means, please do so. You can do that in the links in the show description, however you got in this podcast, or going to our website at Good Seats Still Available, searching up episode number 420 with Beth and Mark and myself, and you can conveniently purchase it there in hardcover. And I think maybe, I'm not sure yet, a Kindle version perhaps coming soon as well. But first, give a listen to this conversation. I think you're going to find it really intriguing. It is endlessly interesting to me. And here's our conversation from back in early September. Lots has happened since. Please, as always, enjoy. The impetus for this show, and as I was saying to Mark before we got all of us together, my initial entree to the realm, the world, the idiosyncrasies, shall we say, of teams and leagues and stuff that are long gone and forgotten, or frankly shouldn't be forgotten, was started off by my interest in, as a kid, with the New York Cosmos soccer team in the New York area where I was growing up and stuff. So to see that sort of white hot comet of this thing called professional soccer sort of appear and then just as quickly disappear has just led into a labyrinthian search for all kinds of teams and leagues and situations that don't exist. And I got to tell you that cricket in the United States, to me, is an interesting enigma that I think I've gotten a little bit more knowledgeable about. But maybe before we get there, especially in the United States and its interpretations of cricket and its embrace and its latent popularity, let me get from both of you a little intro from each and why the two of you found this truly dark corner of quote unquote American sports history to be interesting, especially given where you're both domiciled.
Mark, do you want to go first on this?
Yeah, sure. So in the 90s, Beth and I lived in a place called Bristol in the southwest of England, specifically in inner city Bristol, and we were both members of a sports club called the Eastern Cowboys. And this sports club is a bit of a radical kind of social philosophy. We do a lot of community outreach within Bristol, but also across Europe. Very much kind of at the vanguard of kind of progressive politics and just with a slightly different twist on sport, really. And so the Eastern Cowboys at that time in the 90s, they had 3 or 4 football teams and a cricket team or cricket club. And I happened to be secretary of the cricket club. Beth was more active on the football side, never played cricket. However, the football team organized a tour to a place in southern Mexico called Chiapas, right down on the border with Guatemala. And
oh, sure, of course.
They went there to play football against the Zapatistas, which are these kind of indigenous rights group that declared their area of Chiapas an autonomous zone. And so they organized a tour to Chiapas, and this kind of provoked in me and the rest of the cricket team is like, or club, well, we need to do something, or to make our statement, so to speak. And it was about 1998, I think, maybe 99, and there was this cricket club from LA called the Compton Homies and Pops, which was like a social project run by this this kind of couple. There was Katie Haber, who was this kind of English lady who is head of BAFTA or chair of BAFTA, the British Arts Association in LA, and she's kind of like a Hollywood legend in many ways. And then her kind of activist partner, I suppose, a guy called Ted Hayes, who was a homeless activist. For some reason, they cobbled together this cricket club called the Compton Homies and Pops, and they were touring the UK and playing at Windsor Castle against a team that had been put together by like the royal family or something. So it was kind of like this kind of rando left field event that I noticed on the news, and I said to the other members of the club, listen, we could go out to LA and play the Compton Homies and Pops as part of our tour, and our making our statement as a cricket club. And so that's really how we got into American cricket. Really, it was through that tour, which did take place in 2000, September 2000, and the BBC made a documentary about it because we played a 2-day test game against the Compton Homies and Pops, which at the time was an extraordinary club and an extraordinary project, and voila, and that was really the kind of genesis of this project, I suppose.
Interesting. Before we get to you, Beth, it's what did you even think? I mean, this is the lead in. What did you even think there was in terms of cricket in the United States? I mean, the fact that this team existed sort of on your radar uniquely. I mean, were you surprised to even know that there was even a roots of interest of the sport here? I mean, frankly.
To be honest, I wasn't really thinking about like the wider participation of, or the wider sport of cricket in the United States. I was very narrowly focused on that particular event. However, we did go out to Northern California because the club was so the tour was about 2 weeks long. So the focal point was the 2-day test match in LA, but then afterwards we went up to Northern California and played around Marin County and around just north of the Bay Area. So all we knew was there was cricket in California, and at that point didn't really try to project out to the rest of the country or try to get any, it wasn't part of the narrative we were kind of focused on. So fairly minimal expectations, to be honest, at that point. This was like 1999, 2000. Beth, would you concur with that?
Yes, I do remember the first time someone suggested, oh, the cricket team are going to California to play cricket against this team of ex-gang members. And I laughed my head off because it seemed so ridiculous.
Yeah, I was going to say Compton is not the most likely place you would even think a cricket team might even be located, let alone the country, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the last place in the United States, quite frankly.
But so yeah, I joined in on this, and we met. We went out to California the next year. We met Ted and Katie and saw the amazing work they had been doing with this team of Latino guys from Compton, and how they had made a huge difference to their lives by introducing cricket to them. And I suppose the next step was, it got me thinking, well, there must be other stories, about cricket in the United States. It can't be just this in California. There must be more to it than that. So, I did a little bit of research, and there seemed to be potential there for for a book of some kind about this. So yeah, that's where we first had the idea of the project, really. So yeah, it's been a long time coming. It's 25 years really since that first tour. So
so, all right, let me get
yeah.
into this. So, what is the impetus then? Because as we record this in the fall now of 2025, right? And maybe we could use this as the route we can go backwards and stuff. But I mean, to me, the how cricket has evolved in this country is both fascinating and flummoxing, because it's really intriguing, because as you guys will talk about in a second, I mean, the roots of the sport in this country are very deep and go very far back into, and we'll talk about in particular where regionally and stuff. But it's fascinating to me that today's Major League Cricket, and I know there are a bunch of different stops along the way. I've seen some of those games. It's been very hard as a classic American sports fan, if you will, to actually find these games on television. That's another issue. But I'm fascinated by having seen some of those games over the last couple of years, and how distinctly un-American those productions are. It's almost to the point where it feels like these are matches that are being played here, but being truly produced for audiences that are not in the United States, which seems counterintuitive when you think that this league would want to grow and make more accessible the professional level sport here in this country. And maybe, I don't know, maybe having read through some of your stuff here, maybe that's part of the problem that the sport has had in this country over the many decades and almost centuries, that it's hasn't maybe shaken its quote unquote foreign perception and roots.
That's an interesting question.
Well, it's definitely an immigrant game.
For
It's
sure.
a first, second, third, fourth, fifth generation immigrant game, because cricket has been played continuously in the United States since the 19th century. And so it is a game that has kind of existed on the margins as a result. In respect of like where the Major League Cricket is at the moment, you're very right to say that it's packaged with, let's say, foreign commercial TV rights in mind, because the internal demand in the wider American public is obviously pretty much zero, as you know. There is fairly substantial internal demand from those who play cricket themselves and their kind of like social groups and everything. But the big demand is more like your India, your Pakistan, your the Southeast Asian continent, really. So but it's a paradox that that the very first international match of any sort really was United States versus Canada back in the 19th century. So but it's right here, right now. It's very much still in quotes an immigrant game.
I do think it's fascinating though that as you mentioned, right, the sport really does trace itself to the earliest days of this country, even in its formation. British colonists brought it over with them, which is naturally assumed. But I was very interested over the years to figure out that Philadelphia, for some strange reason, became kind of the initial real center or cradle of the sport here. Maybe a little bit of background onto how perhaps that came about, because that, again, to the traditional modern day American sports fan, also seems somewhat head scratching. Why the Philadelphia region, would you say? I think I've got some notions.
Well, I think Philadelphia, that's a good question. Philadelphia, I think the game was always played throughout most of the 19th century at a higher standard there than other places in the United States. There were a number of greater number of teams that were in the local area, but also I think it was played among the very specific social class as well, genteel, moneyed class from the upper echelons of American society in the late 19th century and early 20th century.
And I'm sorry, also some of the more elite colleges too, or universities,
yes,
right?
Yeah. Haverford College continues. Well, they've been playing cricket continuously since the 19th century. The major library repository of books and records about the game in the United States is there at Haverford College, just outside Philadelphia. But yeah, there was this Pacific social class that played the game, and cricket was seen as a social signifier. It was that you were, a good chap, that you're a gentleman. You were much in the same way as it was in England at the time, and this survived in Philadelphia right up to the First World War, really. In fact, you can still see the grounds, even though cricket
beautiful
is not played in places like Merion or Germantown or Philadelphia Cricket Club for decades, and it's all been revived in each of those places since the 1980s.
Well, that refinement dynamic is really is intriguing, because as we've learned in this show, as we've gone back to some of the earliest days of baseball, and its literal and figuratively unruly evolution from a pretty rough game on an amateur level into the beginning years of whatever professional quote unquote was. I mean, as you two certainly know, there is definitely a belief that there was a split there, that this baseball thing that America essentially moved into and became and more adopted more on a wider basis has its roots and/or is either rightly or wrongly conflated or confused with the early days of cricket's evolution too. Do you guys want to address that a little bit? Because it does seem that there's some vector there, some little fork in the road there in those late 1800s, where baseball and cricket were common enough, or at least similar enough, where there was kind of almost, I don't want to say a choice had to be made, but it certainly seems like there was an evolution, if you will, of the game. Not unlike American football, by the way, from association football, right? So
until the American Civil War, cricket was the number one sport in the United States. Obviously, the United States at that time the population was a lot smaller, etc. But it was like, cricket was keenly played in particularly in the Philadelphia heartlands. But with the advent of the American Civil War, that's when baseball really took off, because all these guys, predominantly guys in military camps all over the place on both sides of the conflict, could play pickup games with baseball, whereas cricket has an inherent logistical issue that you just can't play a pickup game to any high level, because you need to have a manicured square, which is the part of the pitch upon which where most of the action takes place. And it's just like a golf course. If you have a green and it's not prepared correctly, then you just can't play to that higher level. So there's logistical kind of impediments to just playing pickup games with cricket, whereas all these troops effectively, they in between battles or whatever, I suppose, baseball just kind of spread like wildfire, and post American Civil War, cricket just starts to go off a cliff in terms of participation, and within two decades, cricket's just like being left in the rearview mirror. So I mean, I'm not sure, Beth, if you have anything to add or agree with that.
I suppose the other thing to add is the patterns of immigration as well play into this. Towards the end of the 19th century, most of the immigration into the United States was coming from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and places with no connection whatsoever to cricket. And these new Americans wanted to play an American sport when they came over here. Why would they start cricket? There's no tradition there was of playing the game. So I think that plays into it as well. But yes, by the late 19th century, baseball had overtaken cricket completely, and the game had been reduced really to a few pockets in Philadelphia, New York to a lesser extent, and that was about it, really.
I think it's fascinating. I think a lot of people don't know that, or can't even fathom the idea that for the first 100+ years or so of this country's existence, cricket essentially was the leading sport, if you will, in this country. Now, obviously, it's a very different scenario, different lifestyle, and different whatever. But it just speaks to truly how quote unquote American this sport really is when you go back and look at all of it. And even more perplexing that, as we'll get into, the renewal of it or the rediscovery of it hasn't sort of, I don't know, come more full circle, I guess. But we'll get into some of those reasons why. Why do you think Philadelphia, though, continued to persist even despite that branch off of baseball and its, frankly, unruliness, right? I mean, a lot of people who were part of that professionalizing of the game in the late 1800s, early 1900s, right? I mean, we've had many conversations about how just truly, I wouldn't call them cast-offs, but the people who played the game and made the game happen in those early years were not necessarily the most noble of gentlemen, so to speak. As a matter of fact, they were the exact opposite. Maybe that was that helped cement the break between cricket and baseball.
Well, exactly. So even in cricket in the 19th century in England, you had this notion of the gentleman versus the players, because there was an awful lot of gambling on cricket in the 19th century in England. And the players were these kind of like ad hoc teams of semi-professional cricketers who were not affiliated with like private schools or the county teams per se. They were like, almost like pickup teams. And there was an awful lot of money being gambled on cricket in England at the time. So that's kind of like a little bit, I suppose, of how kind of baseball evolved initially. It was more like a game for the players, and this notion of like the gentleman was never a big part of the kind of foundation story for baseball. But within cricket, that was all that was left, to be honest, in the United States. It was, as Beth said, it was a social signifier. It was like kind of remnants of this pre-Civil War society, I suppose, with echoes of the Great Gatsby, So that's and they wanted to kind of keep that that cultural dynamic going even after the Civil War. So that's why it kind of survived. But
is there any particular feature of that class, so to speak, that was part of that milieu? I mean, was it rich, waspy gentlemen? Was there any still, a hint of lack of a better word, ethnic enclaves still? Because I think a lot of people today look at this as largely an Asian, especially Indian and Pakistani rooted, or certainly British still, or the various British Empire diaspora, right? Was there a direct line to that, or were there generations that were evolving in which they were inheriting the game with looser links, shall we say, to the British Empire?
It's interesting. I mean, if you look at the photos, and if you go to somewhere like Haverford College, all the photos from the Philadelphian teams of the late 19th century are all there. They're all white. And do those people have, I suppose they would have had connections to England going back in terms of their ancestry. They didn't look as if they had connections to the other Commonwealth countries, maybe India or the Caribbean. You have to get into the interwar period for the Caribbean influence to come into American cricket, and that's mainly as a result of migration from the West Indies up to places like New York, which kept the game going in in cities like that between the wars.
Which
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, so that kind of Caribbean renaissance of cricket, I suppose, just after the First World War, didn't really touch the Philadelphia scene. That was very much self-contained in New York and the regions around New York. So this kind of Philadelphia, Germantown, Haverford scene was very much an anachronism post-Civil War. And quite often those clubs had a tennis club co-located. It was like it was a country club, and they had cricket and they had tennis and they may have even croquet, I think, at one of them. So that was the kind of genteel atmosphere that was nurtured in those clubs at that time.
Well, so that makes it even more interesting, right? So I'd love to a little bit more about this Caribbean influence, because frankly, you could not think of two more diametrically different dynamics, right, of play. You've got sort of this genteel, multi-generational club-like, literally and figuratively, kind of dynamic going on in, say, the Northeast or Philadelphia and maybe other pockets. And the Caribbean kind of influence, right, is largely of immigrants coming from island communities, maybe first generation. Culturally and socially, you could not probably imagine two more distinctly different dynamics. And how does that, if you will, evolve and fuse, if it did, so to speak? Because you're saying Renaissance. It just seems to me like it could be a marriage of convenience, right? If the cultural and social issues could be more commonly denominated or delineated.
Well, I don't think they did mix. I think
See, that's interesting to me. Yeah.
After the First World War, even in Philadelphia, cricket dies. Simply because the players, there aren't enough players to make up the teams anymore. So it goes into cricket in Philadelphia. It's only revived really, and really since the 1970s, 1980s. The cricket flame is kept going almost solely by the Caribbean migrants up to New York. But was there much mixing between the remnant of the Philadelphia teams and?
Yeah, there was none basically. There may have been a few players who may have picked up some games in New York and gone back to Philadelphia or whatever, but there was no like real cohesive plan, or there was no national body that was trying to oversee the sport and try to make the connections. So yeah, very much this renaissance in quotes was the renaissance of the game itself. And just so happened to be in the New York region and driven by these Caribbean immigration. And of course, cricket in the Caribbean had established itself around the 1870s or so and was at that time the number one sport, and arguably still is, even though the debate now is a lot more heated than it was like 30 years ago, as to what is the number one sport in the Caribbean. But also the style of game, as you hinted at, Tim, was going to be, well, the style of the culture around the game. The spectators, what the onlookers, what the kind of banter was very much different because of the Caribbean influence, and it went more to kind of hardball cricket. Very competitive, much more intense than the kind of genteel surroundings. Even though the level of cricket in the Philadelphia region up until probably 10 or 15 years after the Civil War was still quite high. They would do international tours and stuff. But as soon as the 20th century kicked in, and after the First World War, then the central gravity completely is New York area, and a different type of cricket.
Well, look, it's also an investment, right? I mean, this is a sport that until we're not even talking about the more modern versions of it, which we'll get to in a minute. But it's an investment of time and energy, a little bit of money, and it's these are games, these are matches that are these are played over days, not necessarily a couple of hours,
Exactly.
right? And that makes it even more the antithesis of universally appealing or trying to broaden the appeal, if you will. So I can imagine how it almost truly became, during the course of the 20th century in the United States, still very much a true niche kind of thing. But the niche is actually, there are probably niches, really, if you will, of people playing. And we mentioned two of them, right? Sort of the genteel, the generational and Northeast kind of elite thing, the Caribbean one. But then there's also the influx of other populations, in particular from Indian and Asian cultures in the latter part, right, of that century, and certainly into this century, which in many respects creates another bubble or environment of intrigue, and perhaps maybe more scaled because of the sheer number of those folks immigrating to the United States.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the major driver of the revival in the game of the last 30, 35 years has been Indian Americans, Pakistani Americans, Bangladeshi Americans who have arrived here. A lot via the tech boom, which we've had since the 1990s. To the extent now that the vast majority of people playing the sport in the US come from a South Asian background. And of course, this has led to tensions, I suppose you could say, between the Caribbean derived population, first, second, third, fourth generation Caribbean Americans, and this new wave of South Asian Americans who play the sport.
Tell me about sort of how the governing body thing has evolved in the United States, because some of this harkens to some of our early knowledge about how soccer/association football has evolved in the United States in terms of its oversight. We have to remember, right, as we're having this uniquely United States conversation, right? I mean, the game is during the 20th century exploding in various parts of the world. And it continues to hugely be in places like India, for example, right? I mean, the IPL is the NFL of the rest of the world in many respects when it comes to professional sports leagues out there. I mean, those rights are, and the attendance and the viewership of those matches are, through the roof, right? So, tell me about the United States's organizational behaviors, I guess, when it comes to overseeing the sport, as well as in relation to whatever the international body is at that point, as well, because you're hinting at tensions. I think that's putting it mildly.
How long have you got?
Yeah. Well, no, I understand. Trust me, I understand. I mean, the soccer thing itself could be a couple of podcasts, but do your best.
Mark,
and we're encouraging people, by the way, to buy the book, so that's okay. Yeah. Don't give away too much of the secrets here.
Of course, yeah. Mark, do you want to have a go at this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, governance of any emerging sport in the United States has to be handled with the understanding that you are actually in the United States, right? And understanding US sports culture from the inside out, and understanding how you get recognized at the federal level as a bona fide sport for which scholarships can be granted, and the grassroots game can be stimulated, and coordinated. So that's the main goal, really, strategically, of any governance body for any sport. Now, cricket does have its particularities around logistics in particular, which do provide or bring challenges. But I think Beth and I would be on the same page to say that the United States Cricket Association has been uh, relatively diabolical in terms of its tactical execution and just what its strategic goals have been. Very much about jockeying for position for when the sport goes big and when the financial contracts get large, not necessarily focusing on what it means and what is necessary in the United States to grow the game from the bottom upwards. This is why we see even today there's an imbalance in respect to the women's game, massive imbalance. If you look at soccer, they've made huge investments in the women's game, right? And that allowed the sport to get the federal recognition to be able to become scholarship programs and all that kind of stuff. And cricket, even today, still hasn't got that focus. So it's got this kind of imbalance, which will inhibit the sport within the United States in terms of like trying to grow it from the base out. Now, it has been diabolical, but in many ways you can't really blame these people, because they're not professional sports administrators. They have been, until fairly recently, people with business interests, with sporting interests, with their own cultural heritage interests, who, very much amateurs at sports administration, and then quite possibly also amateurs at like the business side of sports administration. And then, as Beth says, the ethnic and cultural tensions have, instead of like a team in the same boat rowing in the same direction, has quite often been splintered factions trying to go in different directions. So that hasn't been helpful either. Beth, do you have anything?
I think it's the first thing to say is that sports administration in whatever sport all over the world doesn't have a great reputation. It seems to attract self-seeking individuals who see their role in sports administration as something to big themselves up, really. But Mark is right. It's been particularly diabolical in terms of US cricket. I think it's attracted some well-meaning individuals who feel as if they want to give something back to the game. But I don't think me and Mark will ever forget our encounter with Gladstone Dainty, who for a long time was the president of USACA, and he summed it up perfectly in the interview that he gave to us. And he described the administrators, such as him, as addicts, and he was dead right. They were addicted to administration. They couldn't step aside for the greater good of the game, because being an administrator, being in the top table in USACA, gave meaning to their life. They couldn't step away from it because they had nothing else. Now you see, I think you see this in lots of sports, but I think for one reason or another, US cricket has attracted these sort of individuals for whom cricket means so much. They can't play the sports to any great level anymore, but they feel they can, they're not, part of the executive committee of USACA or now the US Cricket Association, the USA Cricket. They're nothing, and they don't have the self-awareness to realize when it's time to step away and when it's time to, maybe give the job over to someone who actually do it properly.
Well, explain to me in the 2000s, right? I think in the around 2006 or so, right? USACA, which stands for USA Cricket Association, essentially had a major challenger, if you will, quote unquote, from the outside, right? And I am fascinated by this because Well, you describe as to what the challenge was and where it was coming from, because that was the roots of, and I only discovered this fairly recently, of the first attempt to kind of really do a professional league as well. So the intrigue is hugely there, but I think to most American sports fans, this is completely unknown, and this is fairly recent.
There are a number of challenges that were the United States Cricket Association. There was a group calling themselves the Council of League Presidents who tried to take over at one point. There was, well, not the current Major League Cricket, but there was another group called Major League Cricket, which was kind of like a one-man band. This guy we met in New York in 2005, and that didn't get off the ground either. A little later, there was another group called the American Cricket Federation, who actually had some success in getting teams to defect from USACA over to their new organization. So, of course, the problem in all this is that the ICC has a lot on its plate, really, rather than just overseeing what will happen in the United States. All of these rival groups to USACA needed recognition from the ICC, but things didn't really change really until the mid 2010s. 2013, 2014, when there was a case of gerrymandering on such a laughably huge scale. The ICC just had to do something, really, because it was just it was just ludicrous.
Well, before we go further, so the ICC, the International Cricket Council, right, is not too dissimilar. Well, I'm sure it's different, very different than what, say, FIFA tries to do for soccer. Right? And again, this is a loose relationship here, but an international body trying to oversee and or coordinate with local domestic leagues or scenarios and stuff, right? And my understanding is that that USACA was essentially, until this period of time we're talking about, was, how can I best describe it, loosely affiliated, or not like a card-carrying member per se, but was at least aligned with the ICC, but not necessarily connected with. Maybe the dynamics of that is helpful for this conversation, because, well, how much could the ICC foist upon whatever was overseeing the sport in the United States do to make it, quote unquote, conform? Or is that folly?
Yeah, I mean, the relationship between the governing body of cricket in the United States and the ICC has been a bit like, kind of like adolescent teenagers, and kind of, yeah. It's been very much hot and cold, and particularly through the noughties and into the tens. To be fair to the kind of USACA, let's say, the ICC made noises, had plans, partially executed on those plans, but I do feel that they didn't really follow through on a year-by-year basis. I feel that if you look 2006, 7, 8, this kind of period through for the next 10 years or so, they were hot and cold. Now, obviously, they were exasperated by the shenanigans at USACA, but this kind of being engaged and then not being engaged wasn't necessarily helpful in itself. They strategically, it is in the interest of the ICC to have successful international tournaments in the United States, because it's a huge untapped market. Obviously, everybody knows that. But if that's your strategic objective, then tactically and operationally, you need to stick to that. And that's a multi-year, multi-decadal endeavor. But it's true to say that certainly ICC members would be exasperated by what the goings on at USACA. Beth, do you want to kind of add more colour there?
They were, but I think it's difficult, really, because did the ICC have the time and the energy to sort out what was really a domestic issue? So what happens in the later part of the noughties and going into the tens is every so often the USA will be suspended. Its membership would be suspended from the ICC, and they'll say certain things have to be put in place, and then Gladstone Dainty and his cronies went some way to correcting these things, and the USA was let back in. And this happened 2 or 3 times until, this ridiculous gerrymandering episode, I think it's 2013 elections to USACA, where most of the leagues, I think 35 of the leagues, possibly that number, who could vote in the USACA as elections were stopped from voting because of ridiculous technicalities. And of course, those 35 are the ones who would have voted against Gladstone Dainty. So he managed to win that election yet again. And this was the trigger really for the American Cricket Federation to start organising. And then bit by bit after that, you see leagues defecting from USACA over to the American Cricket Federation. And slowly but surely, but the whole house of cards fall in on USACA at that point.
I want to let me double click a bit on these two sort of pro leagues that sort of came and went during this period of time, because this is also part of the mix. And I think, frankly, this is what most people would look for and want to align to as potentially a fan interesting, broadening the appeal and that kind of stuff. And when there's a pro league that starts up, that usually generates attention and stuff. But it's really interesting that these two leagues in the aughts, right, kind of came and went so quickly that if you were not paying attention, which most American sports fans were not, you would have missed them. But they're interesting because I can't sort of figure out the starting and stopping point of this, and the background you've given about sort of the USACA thing and the challenges to that, and then the House of Cards and all that stuff, and the relationship with ICC, all that stuff to me is interesting. Background to these two things. So first, this blip in 2004, which was called Pro Cricket. I think you hinted at it before. This was kind of the one-man thing, right? With this Cal Patel guy.
Cal Patel, yes, we did try and interview him, but he's now back in India, actually.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to him about this, because to me, that this is a story that really, I think, hasn't really been told about, like the starting of it, how it was delivered, the challenges, why it went away. I mean, I think most people who don't understand the intrigue that you've just described about sort of the professional oversight of the sport, or just the oversight of the sport generally, would just wonder what was this story all about?
Well, this was around the time we started the project. But yes, I mean, to be fair to Cal Patel, it did actually there was one season of pro cricket. I think it failed generally because the money ran out. I mean, to pay players, you need sponsors and you need TV deals, and they weren't able to get enough of that on the table for a second season in 2005. And as I said, Cal Patel went back to India and seemed to be uncontactable. I think he's doing something completely different now.
But there were 8 teams though. There were a bunch of the New York Metro. There was 2 in New York and New Jersey and DC and Florida, Chicago, San Francisco. I mean, Texas even had one near Houston.
But right there, you know, like, let's just try and budget for that. Let's imagine we're going to budget a league, and we're going to budget for the playoffs and the finals and all that stuff. We're going to try and get our commercial sponsors lined up to help pay for that, because there's no support from USACA, there's no support from ICC. It's a pretty daunting undertaking.
It's essentially rogue, is what you're saying, right?
I mean, it's, playing one game of cricket in the United States at that kind of interstate level is pretty expensive for the players, and let alone fans, because just of the logistics of traveling around the United States and the size. I mean, this is
Yeah, or finding proper places to play, right? So a lot of these were minor league baseball parks, which aren't necessarily well equipped for it either.
Well, exactly. Until Broward County Stadium or Broward Stadium in Broward County, Florida, opened, which was, when was that, Beth? Like two,
2007.
yeah, in 2007. There wasn't, you know, obviously there's cricket fields in New York, in LA, and Houston dotted around, but no real recognized stadium that is dedicated to cricket. So logistically, very difficult to and expensive, So trying to get a league going, I'm not surprised it just came and went so quickly, particularly at that time. But you have to also realize that on the commercial side, that cricket has been the number one pay-per-view cable sport in the United States. But none of that revenue stream ever went to grassroots cricket. It went to, cable TV or whatever. So, it's been really difficult on the commercialization side, but also just the logistics. Because cricket isn't like, to play high level cricket, you need proper pitches and particularly the square. Because that, as I said earlier, needs to be manicured and prepared and rolled and looked after. You need like full-time groundsman, quite frank, or groundsperson, so not easy to try and set up a new league. And that's even before you've got this reality where there's a lot of schisms and factions going up against each other.
So, all right. So tell me then about this Major League Cricket thing. And I know it's a little murky, right? But Major League Cricket it's an entity that was kind of begun in the aughts, but also, I guess, wanted to step in and potentially pick up and or do it better from what Pro Cricket tried to do in 04. But that kind of never really, did it ever get off the ground? I can't even tell if it was an actual league or so, or is this more wishful thinking and trying to establish some of the mechanics that would be necessary to perhaps maybe more genuinely get in the better graces of the ICC and actually do it. But did it ever really happen, the first MLC?
No, it didn't.
Okay, that's what I thought. But that's to me is like right there is an asterisk that needs to be described a little bit further.
I know. So the first attempt at MLC was really this one guy. And again, it's another cricket entrepreneur. We even have a chapter in the book called Dreamers and Schemers about these individuals.
Which is hugely appropriate, right? No doubt.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this guy was a guy called Bernard Cameron, he'd made his money on Wall Street, and he'd been also involved as a musician as well, professional musician for a while. He came from a Caribbean background, and he had the idea of Major League Cricket and doing something similar to what has been happening for the last 3 years in Texas. And so the idea was he'd started in 2006, and he even had the idea of MLC becoming recognised by the ICC as the main governing body for cricket in the United States. And actually, that he wrote the ICC saying that they should. The problem is by that stage they hadn't even completed a season. I think they'd had one tournament down in Florida, and that's all that happened. And Bernard Cameron disappeared into obscurity. And yeah, we haven't. I don't think the website is even up and running now.
But it also feels like it was. I think was there also an attempt though to kind of create some structure and more grassroots and that kind of stuff, which is arguably what USACA should have been doing too, right? Which is, not just a pro league, but a pro league as part of a more comprehensive system. Or was that also a dream?
Just a dream. I don't. He talked big, did Bernard Cameron, but none of this ever happened. And again, the same old problems, really. He talked about getting sponsors. He talked about attracting TV money. But these, to get, the big sponsors, the multinationals to attract TV rights from, say, India. You need to be a bit more than one man operation. You need to have some serious backing, and he didn't. I don't think he stood a chance really, which is a shame. Really, he was a nice guy, but nothing ever came of it really.
A lot of these dreamers and schemers that we met along the way, you got to like them. Like when you meet them, they're very likable people. Just like they're just trying to get something going, and you got to admire their tenacity to try and do that at quite a lot of personal financial cost quite often. But quite often they're pretty interesting characters in themselves.
Well, also against a background of oversight cacophony, right? Where there's a lot of there's not a lot of structure behind them, especially when you've got oversight bodies that are fighting with each other or not existent or splintering into whatever, right? That's a tough backdrop to create a pro league or any kind of structure, it seems.
Also, you want the coordination with the leagues. Like Beth was saying about the league presidents association or whatever. The leagues need to be structured in this kind of semi-pyramidic kind of way, you know what I mean, at a national level. So that's going to be, and they're going to feed players into the MLC teams, but that kind of coordination also wasn't in place. So hence why these lone individuals would try and get something up and running, despite it all.
I think it's important to inject here the type of game we're really talking about, right? This is, we described the multi-day test kind of structure and stuff, but a lot of the stuff in the aughts, right, in terms of trying to professionalize this or give it a go in the United States and stuff, was of the 2020 kind of version, right, which is sort of a slimmed down, much more, if you will, modern product of the game. Maybe a bit of that, because it's clear that on the international front, 2020 was becoming much more acceptable. I don't know, acceptable per se, but more monetizable or more productizable, so to speak, and maybe in the eyes of U.S. based promoters and stuff, a lot more attractive and approachable to maybe the common American sports fan, a little bit more accessible, shall we say?
Absolutely, and I think I don't think the idea of a 5-day test or even a 1-day game has really ever stood a chance of capturing the imagination of the US sporting public. But T20, absolutely, because it's roughly the same length as a baseball game. So I think that it's no surprise that T20 started with the early years of this century. And that's when you start to see a lot of these cricket entrepreneurs coming out of the woodwork with the idea of T20 leagues, because it's a more digestible format, I think, for American sports fans.
And television, even if in around the world, right? Like in India, for example, right? Television much more TV friendly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, but can I just say a few things? As like, I've played a lot of cricket. Beth wasn't a cricketer per se, so I see it from the cricketer's perspective. And 2020 isn't a modern format per se. When I was a kid playing for the village cricket club, when I was 11, 12, 13 years old, we'd play 20 games on a Wednesday night. It was a midweek game. Purely, like the sun goes down at a certain time and you've got to get the game in, right? So 2020 has been a format that's been around for donkey's years, for those kind of midweek games. At club cricket level, at the weekends, you would play either 40 or 50 over games. Now, for the listener who may not be familiar with how long does a cricket match take, well, a 2020 game will take 4 hours, let's say, and a 50 over game will take all day, i.e., you will start at 11 in the morning and finish at 7 or 8 in the evening, with breaks for lunch and afternoon tea, which is, you know,
Quaint.
a quaint particularity of cricket. But the test game, the test format, which is the international format, is as you said, is a 5-day match, and it's quite possible nobody wins. I mean, in any game of cricket, it's quite possible nobody wins, but in a 5-day game, the odds that it's a draw are non-negligible. But it's the highest form of the game because the amount of strategy, tactics that can be brought to bear on any particular match, the kind, as a batsman, how you can craft a long innings in a 2020 game or the 50 over game. You've very much got pressure to score runs pretty quickly, particularly in the 2020 format. In the 5-day game, you can like carve out an innings over the course of a couple of days, and put the other team like to death in the field. So you've got much more nuance. The bowlers have way more time to tune in to bowl like spells. They've got much more time to tune into the pitch, because the pitch makes a lot of difference in cricket, and different types of bowlers can come into play. Whereas in a 2020 game or the 50 over game, you've got, just because there's less overs available, you've got less options on the bowling side, let's say. So so any listeners who have not been exposed to cricket, yes, 2020 is packaged for TV, but it's a format that's been around for a long time. But if you really want to understand the game, go to an international test match and just hang out there. Because that's where you'll see the fullest range of skills and tactics and strategy brought to bear on a game.
But Americans have no time for that kind of stuff.
I'm not. It's not just Americans.
Yeah, this always the American exceptionalism. Well, but okay, but that said, though, I mean,
hold on a second. Let's just pick up on that. The US, golf, right?
Fair enough. Totally fair enough.
4-day game, and everybody's like, particularly this year, right, at the Masters, it's like amazing engagement at the very end of the 4th day, and everybody's talking about it for weeks afterwards. So I do disagree with that, but I do agree it's a very long ask.
I totally get it, but we also see like in baseball, right? I mean, baseball has been arguably kind of the most, maybe along with golf, perhaps the most. I don't know, expansive type of play, right? And you see it now, and maybe because of television, certainly because of social media and attention spans getting shorter and stuff, which I think is a global thing. Tweaks to the game, right? Speed it up, right? We don't want 4 or 5, or multiple innings and no winner and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and I think soccer itself comes and goes with that kind of stuff too. I think you'll see a few more North American Soccer League kinds of things maybe creep back into the mix where, it's maybe they're quarters instead of I mean, who knows, right? But there's no question that if there's going to be any attempt to get the traditional casual American sports fan even semi-interested in a new sport, it's going to have to be of they may not figure they're going to have the time to learn the depth and the nuances of the game. And maybe that's the price one as a cricketer and as an administrator has to pay in order to get this stupid country of ours to kind of maybe a light to it a little bit. Now, all that said, right, and I know I'm putting a lot on you guys here, but let to hear it. Let's talk about the current Major League Cricket, which has been around for a couple of years now. In the United States, there seems to be now, with USA Cricket also now part of the mix, which is the relatively new 8-year-old oversight realm of the sport here, which seems to have maybe solidified the oversight a bit more. And we're now actually seeing some actual commitment to facilities, right? So in Texas now, we've got this dedicated facility where MLC kind of calls its home. You mentioned the Broward County, I think, facility in Florida. Tell me about what's existing now and what your thoughts are about Major League Cricket as it enters or has just finished its, second or third season here in the United States, which, by the way, itself might be a statement that people who are listening to this podcast don't even realize.
Yes. So I went to the final and the semi-finals in 2023. I had to say I was impressed by what I saw there, both in terms of the standard of cricket, but also the presentation of it all. Now, I suppose I didn't go in 2024 and I haven't been this year. So
for example, I watched it on TV. Was it last season or the season before when some of the matches were available on American cable without a pay-per-view kind of thing, and I found it fascinating. The presentation was great. Didn't know all the rules and stuff, but I stayed with it to kind of pick up on some of the stuff. I thought it was, granted, it presented as an international product. We'll talk about that, but I found it moved along. It was exciting. There were the stories about the players, and the fans seemed to be having a hell of a time, and they panned the crowd a lot. It was great.
yeah.
But then it wasn't available for the American sports fan to watch really without a paid subscription to Willow TV for the next 2 years. So I don't get that.
Well, you could certainly watch it in the UK. I saw it last year on TV here, and I think it was available in India, which I guess are the two of the markets they're looking to. But I guess, the downside of it is, it just seems to be mainly based in Texas, and it's a good ground there at Grand Prairie. I don't know. Well, I'm sure you know, Tim. It's all up in the air at the moment because the contract between American Cricket Enterprises and USA Cricket has now been it's been torn up, hasn't it? So where this leaves MLC for next season, I don't know. But it'd be a huge shame if it doesn't make it to a fourth season. So I think
that would be shocking if it doesn't, because there is genuine appetite for the MLC as in its previous incarnation to be successful, both from the players themselves and the fans, as you said, Tim. Now, there's also the logistical level. There are the stadiums available. The grounds are at pretty high level of at least the pitch itself. The facilities sometimes can leave something to be desired, but there is definite enthusiasm from the players themselves, because this is their pathway to becoming professionals. Because without the MLC, there is no pathway for talent to be nurtured within the United States and then to actually have a career, as a cricketer. Because if you do make it in the MLC, if you get recognized in the MLC, then you will probably get poached by an IPL team, for example, or the Caribbean Premier League team. There is this movement of players coming through the MLC and then into these other environments. So within these one-day formats, not at the international game, like playing for the USA, that's a different thing. But, so the players are, super enthusiastic. The fans are there. So everything is in place for the MLC to be successful. Whether hubris, whether greed will sabotage it, as it has done possibly in the past, even though I don't think they ever got to a critical mass. Like the MLC now, in my opinion, has a critical mass and a platform to be successful going forward. But we don't get full insights into the commercials, into the politics, all that kind of stuff. But certainly the players we spoke to, and maybe you can back me up, Beth, are super enthusiastic, because that is their pathway to being professionals.
Yes, and the other thing to bear in mind, of course, has been a huge investment from IPL teams in this as well. Four of the six teams, I believe, are American franchise, well, American franchises of existing IPL franchises. So, they want a return on their investment as well. So I'd be, if it doesn't make it to a fourth season, um, I'm sure something can be rescued from it because there's demand for it in Texas. I know crowds were down a bit in 2024 and 2023, but I think that was partly because of the America just had the T20 World Cup, so
which itself was a big deal. I mean, in the cricket world, right? I mean, the fact that the U.S. could host some of those matches, even if it required a temporary stadium outside of New York City,
Well, yeah.
right? And maybe USAC, the 8-year-old association that now oversees here in the U.S. I don't know. Would you say that the USAC now is, shall we say, better positioned at overseeing the sport and maybe nourishing that pyramidical structure that's needed, or is it still too early to tell, given that it's still relatively new, if you will, and the history that we've just painfully gone through, which is so, doesn't augur very well for harmonization that in too quickly.
Well, on our most recent research trip, which was last year, I don't think we encountered anyone who had anything good to say about USA Cricket, the new organisation. It seems to me that they are just as bad as USACA were, and you've got a lot of self-serving individuals who, never apologize, never explain. I mean, we reached out to them for an interview for this book, but they didn't even respond to our email. So.
Would you say that they've been a little hijacked, if you will, by the Major League Cricket folks in this process? I mean, obviously the investment that MLC brought to the table and some big names, especially from the tech world and of Indian descent, and the IPL's investment and stuff, it almost seems like it was too good to turn down or refuse. It was an offer they couldn't refuse.
One thing to bear in mind is the contract that was signed between American Cricket Enterprises and United States Cricket Organization to develop MLC was one of the most ludicrously one-sided documents that you'd ever see in the business of sport. I think ACE, I think they kept 95% of the revenue coming from MLC, and just 5% of that was going to go to the development of the game in the United States. Why they agreed to that, I don't know. Like I said, they haven't explained, and they haven't, they certainly haven't apologized for that. And we haven't heard the whole story either. I mean, like I said, we tried to reach out to them to get an interview, but they didn't respond to us. So. Where it all stands now, from what I can gather, the ICC are deeply unhappy with United States Cricket, the new organisation, and we might well be back to where we were 10 years ago in terms of another suspension.
And then, do you think by that, and I just see here on there's a Wikipedia entry here about in July there was I guess the ICC issued what they call a roadmap to USA Cricket to restore compliance and integrity and that kind of stuff. Do you think then, assuming that maybe that continues, right, that cannot augur well for a continuation of Major League Cricket, or does it not matter because it's such an invested entity that does it even need USA Cricket's blessings, so to speak? I mean, could they go directly to the ICC or go rogue even with them and just keep going and build whatever it is in the United States?
I mean, you don't need permission to set up an entity such as MLC, right? They've got only a 5% slice is going to the national body, so they're very much in the driving seat. They may just play a waiting game and say, well, listen, we're just going to keep going. We don't actually need you. The players want to play professionally. Do you know what I mean? And this is their only pathway. So, it's the typical kind of power situation, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, difficult
Well,
to see where it's going to
that kind
go.
of response is what I kind of frankly would expect it, because it does seem to me like, given the entire history, what we've gone through, and obviously it's much more complicated than some of the stuff we've even just glossed over. Um, it just seems like the opportunity still is very strong. I mean, the fact that there are like some dedicated grounds now, right? It seems like there have been certainly some fits and starts of movement where this could be, and the demographics of this country and the influx of folks who grew up with the sport and their heritage and stuff. It just seems even more fertile to make something significant and longer lasting happen. The Olympics, for example, having cricket in 2028, which is always the wish of a struggling or fledgling or tertiary sport, right? To kind of give it an oomph or an impetus to go. And maybe that's what it takes, is that, whether it happens in the next intervening years, maybe 2028 is the way it gets rebooted again. I don't know.
Well, I think you're right, and I think it's very much, in the course of our research for this book, it's very much been two steps forward, one step back. But I think there has been, a huge advantage, certainly in terms of the grounds now you can play cricket at to a reasonable, grounds at a reasonable standard in the US. We mentioned Grand Prairie in Texas. We mentioned Broward County. There's also Morrisville in Raleigh in
North Carolina.
in North Carolina, yeah. And there are other, there are places. There's also there's one in Houston, and there's
Yeah, even in San Francisco, they're trying to commandeer the Oakland Coliseum, which everybody's abandoned, and utilize that. I don't know how successful that was this season. But the irony of all that is, and I one last question, and I'm gonna let you guys promote, and because this has been great. I mean, you really unlocked a lot of stuff here. It's interesting to me, given where we started this conversation in and around Philadelphia, that Philadelphia doesn't even sort of register in the 8 or 6 teams that make up this thing. You'd think that, I don't know. Maybe I'm just trying to be an historian and try to close the circle, but I don't know. It just seems like that would seem to be a historically rich and marketable dynamic to bring whatever exists of professional professional game in the United States in the Philadelphia region.
It would be great if that were to happen, but and in the last couple of years, they've made MLC have made various noises about expanding the number of teams to 8 or to 10. It would be great if that happens soon. I mean, certainly, I think you could have a Florida team, you could have an LA team, absolutely, and a Philadelphia one. Why not? The appetite is there from cricket fans in those particular cities, and I think if it just needs someone to put the money in, really, because this is all dependent on outside investment, isn't it? But you're right in terms of 2028. It's going. It's lined up for inclusion in the Olympics, and you hope that there's something in LA for the sport to be played in, basically. Because I know they've talked about maybe doing this in New York to make it more accessible for Indian TV audiences. But it wouldn't be in there.
So, yeah, I mean, the temporary stadium, you did mention, Tim, the temporary stadium that was constructed during the 2020 World Cup in New York City. That cost a lot of money. And that money should have been invested in actually another ground. Do you know what I mean? Like, the amount of money they spent on that temporary stadium, they could have had a permanent facility as a legacy of that thing. So I would like to see more long-term considerations when it's coming, from the ICC, and kind of stay with it. In terms of the Olympics, cricket, the Olympics, fantastic. But got to grow the women's game. And this is another thing where the national body needs to step up and really super focus on growing the women's game. We do have a chapter on this. because, as we said right at the beginning of this, you're not going to get federal recognition. You're not going to get the scholarships, because that's how you're going to actually embed the game into the wider US culture. Right now, it's just like happening on the margins. Let's say these kind of marquee events, this kind of MLC, there's a lot of club cricket and stuff, but it's still on the margins until you get to scholarships and people are, hanging out at their college and they see people playing cricket, and getting through college as a result, and that's to get to there, you need to do a lot of investment in the women's game, and just grassroots in general, so the MLC is great, particularly from players who want to be professionals and stuff, from fans, but how much will get percolate down into the grassroots, remains to be seen.
Yeah, and again, this sounds a lot like some of the early days of or the pro soccer in the United States back in the 1960s, that was, trying to kind of put the various entities kind of together and get them on the same page. I don't know. To me, it comes back to, and the last question I'll ask you is sort of what you think the next couple of years looks like for the sport here in the United States. Some of which you've already said, but I'll let you sort of opine. I come back to how Major League Cricket has been really almost unavailable to most television audiences in the United States, where this league is domiciled for a month or two, and in the markets that they're supposedly, playing in, which they're maybe not, right? Because a lot of the games tend to be in one or two or three different locations, and it's kind of a touring model that like lacrosse has been doing in the United States. But I mean, Willow TV is known by people of Indian and Asian descent, perhaps, as a pay-per-view channel. But last year, like, if you could only see a couple of matches on some regional sports networks, like in New York and in Washington, D.C. I know 2 years ago it was on this thing called CBS Sports Network, which is a relatively thinly distributed cable channel in the United States. But in between that, it's been almost basically non-existent. And if there's any hope for casual fans to even check out a match, and it just seems to me that, as was said earlier, it feels to me like this is just it feels like when you watch the television broadcast, expertly produced, it's great, it's fun to watch, but it feels like an Indian export or import and not an American presented sport. And I guess I question who the audience for this really is on the television side. And if it's a U.S. league trying to introduce and or attract people to the sport in the U.S. and maybe develop talent in the U.S., the product on television certainly doesn't feel like that at all. And I don't know if that you experience that when you watch it, where you guys live.
I think you're right to a certain extent. And one of the controversies about MLC has been the fact that very few US-born players have been able to break through and gain starting slots with the 6 franchise teams. A lot of overseas players have come over, and they don't even have to have had citizenship or to have had to been here 6 months. They just need to make a quote unquote a commitment to the United States. So you've had ludicrous situations whereby overseas players have turned up 2 days before the first game, signed a piece of paper that they've made a commitment, and lo and behold, they're American players because there are quotas for each team, you see. And the argument for many US cricket fans is that this isn't actually doing much to develop the sport in terms of developing the players. So
which also sounds like soccer in the United States in the 1960s, right? It's like people who are going to pay attention, right? So import everybody, and then chip away at the American part of it. I guess I'm not trying to be naive about that, but I'm not saying that the product has to be Americanized per se, but it is in the United States, and you think you want to attract people outside of the very deeply passionate Indian and Caribbean and European kind of expat crowd, right? And while that's great as a business model, I mean, over time, those expats, they know where the real stuff really works and lives, and they'll import those signals from they'll do pay-per-view from the IPL all day and all night to watch that stuff, right? I don't know. It just seems counterintuitive if you're trying to quote unquote grow the game in a still evolving marketplace here.
I think you're right. This is their business model, is to concentrate on the first, second, third generation South Asian Americans almost exclusively. The idea of getting it beyond the Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi diaspora. Well, you have to be really determined to find out about cricket. If you don't come from one of those backgrounds in the United States, you have to really, you really have to do your research. I think it's not there for you on a plate, as you said. It's so I think they can, they have to do better on that. Assuming it, we're going to have a fourth season of this, which I very much hope so. Yeah, but there's, but you're right. It's it's like football, really. We've now 60 years since football started developing. Football, when I say football, I mean soccer. In the United States, I think it's 50 years this year since Pele signed for New York Cosmos. And I argue even now, soccer is not. It's not a mainstream game. It's made a lot of steps forward, no doubt, and the USA are now, regularly qualify for World Cups. But if you switch on, the TV in the States and it goes to the sports news, very rarely you hear anything about soccer, let alone cricket. The four major US sports are so dominant in terms of hogging the media spotlight that it's very hard for anything else to gain a foothold, really. And football, soccer has experienced that, and cricket, has experienced that as well. Even during the last, in the T20 World Cup last year, two amazing positive results for the US, but you didn't read about them anywhere. You didn't hear about them on TV. Despite them, beating Pakistan in one of the most exciting one-day games ever. So, yes, there's still a long way to go, I think, in terms of growing the sport beyond the South Asian diaspora.
I mean, the MLC takes the spotlight, but there's also the minor league cricket, which is very vibrant, and all the scores of leagues around the United States that are also very vibrant. Cricket is a vibrant sport in the United States, no doubt about it. If you go to a random game, a club game, which, if you're driving along the freeway somewhere, you might see out the corner of your eye and kind of like go, what the hell's that? But if you do go to one of these games, the players are really enthusiastic about playing cricket. Like they are very passionate. So cricket isn't going away in the United States. It's going to continue growing. It's and the MLC may come and go, but probably will stay as well. It hogs the limelight, but it's not necessarily the main story, and as Beth said, the USA team itself, which we haven't really spoken about, because the story of the USA men's team and the women's team and what they've had to deal with is a whole thing in itself. But the USA team has got some success, and I think we'll continue to do well in particularly in the T20 format, and could break through, in the longer format. So it's a sport that's not going away. It's just, can it be nurtured correctly?
Which sounds like a challenge given what we've been through for the last hour and a half discussing all this, right? It still does. I mean, is there hope to be had here? I mean,
I think if you look at it from a multi-decadal perspective, there is definitely hope to be had. The stadiums are being built, the grounds themselves are improving. The number of players playing continues to grow. The women's game is starting to grow. The appetite is absolutely there. The fact that even MLC can exist and we can even talk about it is a positive sign. We've seen like there were 2 previous attempts that just like came and went, right? This is a much more serious endeavor. I think the underlying trend is definitely in kind of growing the game, and even at the governance level, there has been improvement. They, even though they may get sanctioned again, there has been improvement. So I think if you look at the positives, then there is an underlying trend. It's just when will all the pieces fall together, of this particular jigsaw puzzle, and get this game. For me personally, I think it has to be with federal support in the colleges, scholarships. That is like when you're really going to start to see green shoots in the wider US population. Because if you're a sports mad type of person, right, and you're looking to get a sports scholarship, well, you say, what the hell is this game, cricket? The reality is you can pick up cricket if you're, going to be an elite sportsman quite quickly, right? They're like in the women's game, for example, Beth can elaborate on this. There's people who have crossed over into cricket within a year or so, and can be very competitive. So if those scholarship programs are there, and then you just happen to see, oh yeah, there's this cricket club over there, they do training, indoor training during the winter or whatever, and just, so that's how it will kind of start to bleed out into the wider population, I think. And obviously MLC is important because that gives you a professional pathway as a player that hasn't existed, even though, as Beth said, it's kind of being crowded out to a certain degree, which, they need to have a quota system to ensure that homegrown talent is nurtured and gets the exposure to the more competitive forms of the game. But I would say the underlying trend is definitely growth. Whether they want to like self-implode through psychodramas because people just can't let it go because they're addicts or whatever, or they're just not, like, the commercial contracts just are too big potentially with the IPL involvement, and it just, like, as money can create problems. So remains to be seen. But even if the MLC and its existing structure kind of disappears, I think there will be another one would materialize at some point. I just think there's this, the underlying trend is moving in that direction.
Beth, you get the last word. What do you think?
I think Mark's right. I think, like I said, we've seen 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Compared to 20 years ago when we first started this project, I think it's an enormously more healthy state. There are more players than ever before. There's greater investment, and yeah, the MLC is a massive plus. So yeah, I'm hopeful. I just hope that they're able to stay in and play in the T20 World Cup next year, because I think that's under question at the moment. And I think if USA Cricket's new organisation get suspended again, of course that will be that'll be up. They may not be able to make it over to India next year. But in the long term, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think you could easily see USA at a 50-over World Cup at some point in the near future, and that would be wonderful. And who knows what the Olympics in 2028 will bring.
All right. My thanks to Mark and to Beth. And we'll see. Yeah, the Olympics in 2028 is an interesting pivot point for the sport of cricket. And we'll see if the craziness between USA Cricket and Major League Cricket and all the other various folks in the middle, the ICC, et cetera, all if they can all get together and truly take advantage of this once in a generation opportunity to kind of reset the pro game here and make a true go out of it in the years ahead. And again, as you heard, lots of great history behind the sport here in the U.S. And if only for the children in the room that need some adult supervision to get it all coordinated and together and truly Americanized and off and running again. We'll see. It's constantly a drama with this sport, and it's well worth keeping an eye on, and we certainly will do our best to do so. But in the meantime, you owe it to yourself to get this book. It's called An American Cricket Odyssey, A Journey into the Soul of Cricket in the United States. It is put together by our guests this week, Beth Simpson and Mark Greenslade. It is available from our friends at Pitch Publishing, and you can find it wherever good books are found, of course. But if you'd like to give us a couple of shekels of referral love and help keep our lights on, we'd appreciate it. If you either find the link or two in the podcast feeder that is delivering this episode to you, or on YouTube if you're listening to it that way, there's a link there, or go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. All you got to do is find this episode numbered 420 with myself and Beth and Mark, and you'll find a convenient link to the hardcover version or whatever other versions are available as you might and when you might be listening to this. And we appreciate that very much, for sure. You can follow more about the book and what Beth and Mark are doing to promote it. You can go to their website. It's An American Cricket Odyssey, all one word, .com, An American Cricket Odyssey.com. And you can also follow them and the book on Blue Sky at Cricket Odyssey USA. Cricket Odyssey USA. And that's .bsky.social, right? And there you go. You can also, while you're doing the socials for general purposes, you can follow us. Why don't you? We'd love to have you around. You can follow us on Blue Sky at goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can follow us on X at goodseatsstill, and just about everywhere else you will find us at Good Seats Still Available, all one word, including of course, YouTube, where we stream these shows in addition to podcast land out there as well. Our thanks, of course, to you for listening. Our friend Jerry Payne down in Metro Atlanta for his audio excellence this week. Thank you, kind sir. If you'd like to send us some email, we're at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And that's all I got this week. So more coming to you next week. So much fun and excitement coming. And thank you for supporting the show. As always, lots more ahead. Take care of yourselves.